A lot of people tend to think the C2 as the ultimate goal of language learning, but the truth is that speaking a foreign language at a C2 level and speaking like a native speaker are two different things. Hi, my name is Luca from Lampariello.com, and today I'm going to show you the difference between speaking at a C2 level and speaking like a native speaker. Have you ever caught yourself using expressions such as, he speaks like a native speaker, he sounds like a native speaker? But the reality is that speaking and native speakers don't go well together in one sense. Native speaker is about identity, is not just about the knowledge, it's not just about the skills. A native speaker is a native speaker, and if you're a foreigner, if you're a non-native speaker, well, you're not a native speaker. That's an important point to take because a lot of people strive for speaking like a native speaker, sounding like a native speaker, but the reality is that this is just a mere emulation. Just to give an example, let's take a Danish professor or a French professor who has been living in the US for a long time and speaks English really well. So well, in fact, that he gives lectures at university and he is much appreciated by his students. Well, that Danish professor speaks English, has acquired native-like skills, so he can speak at a native-like level, he can express himself very well, but he's not a native speaker. On the other hand, let's take a peasant, a person who is a native speaker, still, he was born in the United States, but has no formal education. Who do you think speaks English better among the two? Obviously, the peasant probably speaks English worse. He cannot express himself as eloquently and as elegantly as the professor, but the reality is that he is still the native speaker in this show. So, who speaks English better, the Danish professor or the American peasant? Okay. On the one hand, the Danish professor can express himself very eloquently, can speak really well, can write essays. The peasant, though, although he cannot do all these things, still has an advantage, and the advantage is that he was born in the United States. So he has incorporated all the customs, ways of saying, ways of being, facial features, gestures, experiences that the Danish professor probably didn't have, because he did acquire knowledge, he did acquire the skill of expressing himself elegantly and eloquently, but he was not born there, he did not have the same experiences. So you can learn to speak almost like a native, but bear in mind that you will never be a native speaker. You can emulate the status of a native speaker without being one. The people who get very close to speaking and being native speakers are normally the people who live 30 to 40 years in a country, and their kids were born in that country, so they've seen the entire thing, maybe from an external perspective. They didn't go to the kindergarten, but they've seen their kids go to kindergarten and interact with other kids and interact with other adults, and they've seen adults themselves interacting with kids, going to school, going to high school, etc. Those get close to speaking and being native speakers, but again, they will never be native speakers because they were not born in that country. So if there is one thing for which people can say or can think that you are a native speaker, is accent. If you speak a given language very, very well to the point where people cannot tell that you're a foreigner, well, that means that you have reached a native-like pronunciation. And if you want to reach native-like pronunciation in a given language, you have to take into account other things. People normally tend to think, okay, well, what I have to do is focus on the text, focus on sounds, replicate sounds, repeat, etc. True, but I think that one of the most important factors that is often neglected is that you have to take everything into account, the entire communication tool that every single native speaker has. And by communication tools, I mean my hands, co-speed gestures, my face, how I'm communicating with my face, my eyes, my body, everything, the whole thing. Just to give you a few examples. An Italian might sound like a stereotype, but we actually do that. Actually, they say, ma che sta fa? This is in Rome, right? What are you doing? We tend to use that, especially when we ask questions with an interrogation mark. Ma che sta fa? Or a Spanish would say, pero que te pasa, mazzo? You see the entire expression, que te pasa, mazzo? Or, sag mal, bist du bescheuert, oder? Or the French would go like, bon, je sais pas, s'il faut aller au cinéma, j'ai pas envie. So you got the entire thing. These are just a few samples of how different cultures channel different ways of saying things. And And the accent does count, your pitch, your intonation, your articulation, your pronunciation. But the truth is, your hands, your face, your eyes do count. And if you want to speak and sound and pass off as a native speaker, even if you're not, pay attention to these, watch movies, pay close attention how people communicate with each other, adult with adult, kid with kid. Pay attention to every single detail because they do count, and you can learn these consciously and unconsciously. It should be fairly obvious by now that speaking like a native or passing off like a native is not just a matter of sounds, it's a holistic process. But there is one third factor which makes a difference, and it is cultural understanding. How many times have we found ourselves talking to native speakers, and you've seen two native speakers talking about stuff that you had no idea of, no clue. And this can refer to, I don't know, people on TV or like TV series or maybe TV shows or something that happened, historical things, geographical things, etc., etc. This is part of culture. This is the part of heritage that a given generation of native speakers has. And bear in mind, a given generation of speakers, because language learning, its cues, its cultural references, they do change in space and in time. So if we're speaking, for example, about English, Brits maybe don't understand certain cultural references of Americans, or Americans certain things of Brits. And maybe the same Americans of now might not understand things that were very common 200 years ago. That's the reason why it's so difficult to nail a language, because it changes in time, it changes in space, it changes its cultural references. That's why it's so difficult to, when we talk about being a native speaker, actually we should talk about being a native speaker of that place and of that time. And that's the cultural references that you will never be able to replicate because you were born in another time, or maybe in the same time, but unfortunately in another place. I just wanted to say before we wrap up the video that this is not supposed to be discouraging. I don't want to just put you down and say, hey, you will never be a native speaker. It's just a fact. You will not be a native speaker, but you can pass off as one. This has happened to me many times, and I can guarantee you that even if I'm not American, I'm not French, and I will never be, I'm not German for that matter, or any other nationality, I've had an amazing time every time people thought that I was one of them. Because through sound, you can actually embrace another reality, embrace another culture, and embrace an historical moment, people, communities, you name it. So it's always worth speaking a foreign language. It's always worth passing off as a native if you can, if that's your aim, apart from speaking at an excellent level, because it opens worlds. It makes your life richer in so many ways you cannot even start to fathom. So the first point to take into account is that speaking like a native does not equal being like a native, because being like a native is just a unique characteristic of native speakers, and that's fine. The second point to take away is that if you want to sound like a native speaker, you should not only speak like a native speaker, that is with good articulation and pronunciation, but also act like one with code gestures, reactions, facial features, you name it. It's just like a little bit like acting. And the third thing, if you want to pass off as a native speaker, is that you should integrate in being able to understand the same cultural and historical references, and maybe from TV and TV series, etc., that native speakers do in a given space and in a given time. If you liked the video and you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and click on the link below. There's a wonderful article waiting for you about this very same topic with more examples. You can also listen to it, you name it. There's a lot of stuff there. Please head over my blog and my website. You will not regret it.